The perihelion was already 3 minutes behind schedule when Camel found the alien sitting in her cargo hold. She'd come down to check the mag clamps on the ore containers before undocking, standard pre-burn checklist. Nothing exciting. The kind of job she'd done 400 times in 7 years of running salvage routes between the belt stations. The hold smelled like iron filings and old hydraulic fluid, the way it always smelled, and the lighting was bad because 2 of the overhead strips had been out for 6 weeks, and replacement parts were on perpetual backorder. Camel moved through the familiar dark the way she always did, one hand on the container rails, feet finding the deck in the 3/4 gravity the station's rotation provided. She almost missed it. The alien was wedged between container 7 and the hull, 6 limbs folded tight, a posture that read as either sleeping or dying, and the faint bioluminescent pulse coming off its skin was the only thing that saved it from looking like a pile of discarded equipment. The light was blue-green, slow, irregular. A healthy Veth pulsed at around 80 cycles per minute. According to the diplomatic briefings, Camel had half-read during the mandatory first contact orientation 3 years ago. This one was doing maybe 30. One of its middle limbs was wrong. She didn't need a xenobiology degree to see that. The joint was bent in a direction it wasn't built to bend, the skin around it dark and tight swollen, and when she moved closer with her work light, the alien's pulses spiked into something frantic and irregular. "Okay," Camel said to herself as much as anything. "Okay." She keyed her comm. "Port Authority, this is perihelion, PER 7741. I'm going to need to delay undocking." The response came back in the flat bureaucratic register of someone who'd heard every excuse. Reason for delay, perihelion. Camel looked at the injured alien. The injured alien looked back at her with 3 of its 4 sensory clusters, the light in its skin going quieter, like it was trying to make itself smaller. "Medical situation," she said. "I'll file the paperwork." She cut the comm before they could argue, then went to get the medkit. The Veth's translator node was a small device, roughly disc-shaped, clipped to the base of what Camel was loosely calling its neck. When she crouched next to it and said slowly, "I'm going to help you," the translator produced a string of tones and then a word. "Assessment." "You're injured," Camel said. "Assessment," the translator said again. Then after a pause, "Correct. Injury occurred. Entrapment. Containers shifted during previous docking sequence." "How long have you been in here?" The translator took longer this time. "Temporal measurement is approximate, 14 hours. 14 hours in a cargo hold with a compound fracture of whatever that limb's structural equivalent was." Camel kept her face neutral and opened the medkit. The medkit was designed for humans. It contained bandaging material, analgesics, a bone stabilizer cuff, antiseptic spray, and a diagnostic scanner that definitely couldn't read Veth physiology. "I don't know your biology," she said. "I'm going to improvise. Tell me if something makes it worse." The alien's skin flickered, a fast pattern she didn't have vocabulary for. The translator didn't offer one either. She took that as consent and got to work. The bone stabilizer cuff didn't fit the alien's limb geometry, but the rigid interior frame, once she stripped the housing, could be bent into an approximation of a splint. She used it with bandaging wrapped over the swollen joint, not tight enough to restrict circulation if the Veth even had circulation in the relevant sense, firm enough to limit movement. The alien held very still throughout. Its pulse light steadied slightly. "That's as good as I can do until we get you to someone who knows what they're doing," Camel said, sitting back on her heels. "Query," the translator said. "Destination." "Nowhere good right now. The nearest Veth diplomatic contact is Waypoint Auriga, 40 hours at 1G burn." The alien skin went through a complex pattern. The translator produced, "Acceptable." Port Authority, when she called back, was considerably less enthusiastic about the situation. There was a lieutenant on the line who used the words "diplomatic incident" twice in 3 minutes and protocol violation. Once, and I'm going to need you to hold position. Perihelion, more times than Camel had patience for. The alien is injured, Camel said, when the lieutenant paused for breath. I have a rough splint on a compound fracture and a translator node that's running on backup power. Every hour I sit at this dock is an hour it's not getting proper medical care. Ma'am, there is a standard procedure for. Bill me for the delay fees, Camel said. Whatever they are, I'll pay them. She cut the channel, finished the pre-burn checks, and undocked. The perihelion pulled away from the station into the dark, carrying 300 tons of processed ore, one human pilot engineer owner, and one injured alien who hadn't said a word since she'd started the engines, just sat in the cargo hold with its repaired limb extended carefully, its skin pulsing in that slow, watchful rhythm, and watched her work the controls through the open hatchway between the hold and the cockpit with all 4 of its sensory clusters. Camel didn't look back. She had a burn to calculate. But she was aware of it watching. The whole 40-hour run, she was going to be aware of it watching. She set the thrust to a comfortable 0.3 G, low enough to minimize stress on the alien's injury, and pointed the perihelion toward waypoint Auriga. The station lights fell away behind them, and the dark took them in. The Veth's name, as best Camel could render it, was a color she didn't have a word for. The translator gave her the closest approximation as the light that comes through water from below, which was poetic but not useful as a name, so she started thinking of it as ember because of the way its skin glowed when it was thinking hard, a deep amber orange that pulsed slowly and looked, in the dim light of the cargo hold, like coals that hadn't quite gone out. She didn't tell the alien this. It seemed like a private system. 18 hours into the burn, the cooling system failed. It wasn't a surprise, exactly. The port on the secondary coolant loop had been showing elevated temperatures for 2 weeks, and Camel had been planning to replace the thermal coupler at her next maintenance stop, which was supposed to be in 6 days, which was not now. The alarm came as a steady amber pulse on the main board. She'd muted the audio after the first 30 seconds, and the reactor temperature gauge began a slow, patient climb toward orange. Problem, she said aloud. Ember, who had moved from the cargo hold to the hatchway sometime in the past 3 hours and was now sitting in the corridor just outside the cockpit, tilted its sensory clusters toward her. Its translator clicked. Query, severity. If I don't fix it in the next 4 hours, the reactor goes into automatic shutdown. If it goes into automatic shutdown, we lose main drive. We're coasting at 0.3 G with 14 tons of fuel and no maneuvering capability until I can do a cold restart, which takes about 6 hours and requires me to be in the reactor bay with the cooling system offline, which is not comfortable. She was already pulling up the maintenance schematics on the secondary display. So, high severity. The alien skin went through the amber thinking pulse. Human solution. EVA. The secondary coolant coupling is on the exterior hull just after the engine block. I need to pull it, clean the thermal contact surfaces, replace the coupler seal, and reconnect. It's a 2-hour job on a good day with a functional EVA suit. She looked at her EVA suit, hanging in the equipment locker. The suit had a patch on the left forearm where she'd caught it on a sharp edge during a salvage run 8 months ago. The patch was rated for vacuum, technically. She'd been meaning to replace the suit. It's going to be a longer day. She suited up alone, the way she always did, the pre-breathe cycling while she checked the patch for the 3rd time and tried not to do the math on what happened to the repair timeline if the suit failed. The exterior hull was cold. Not cold the way cold was on a station, but cold the way the universe was cold, which was a different thing entirely, a thing you felt in your teeth and your joints and somewhere behind your sternum that had nothing to do with temperature regulation. Camel moved along the hull handhold by handhold, her boots mag-locked to the deck plating, while the stars wheeled slowly overhead because the perihelion was rotating. She'd cut rotation during EVAs. She'd forgotten. She needed to go back inside and She keyed her comm. Ember, I need you to cut the ship's rotation. In the cockpit there's a panel marked attitude control. The switch marked spin dampen, push it down. A long pause, then, instruction received, attempting. The stars stopped moving. Camel let out a breath and kept going. The thermal coupler was exactly as bad as she'd expected. The seal had degraded, the contact surfaces were carboned over, and when she pulled the coupling housing the whole assembly tried to take her left glove with it. She caught it, swore, and started cleaning. 20 minutes in, something appeared beside her. Ember had suited up. It didn't have an EVA suit. She'd been vaguely aware of this and not thought through the implications. But apparently Veth had their own solution, which turned out to be a membrane that unfolded from somewhere around its torso and sealed over its exterior, translucent and faintly iridescent, clearly biological. It moved along the hull with the unconscious ease of something that had done this before, its 4 undamaged limbs finding the handholds in sequence, the injured fifth held carefully aside. It stopped next to her and looked at the coupling. I can't ask you to be out here, Camel said. You're injured. The translator produced. Observation. Task requires 2 manipulators. Human has 2 manipulators. I have 4. A pause. Injured limb not required for this task. She couldn't argue with the logic. Fine. I need you to hold this housing exactly here while I work on the contact surface. Ember took the housing. It held it with a steadiness she wouldn't have managed one-handed, its body low to the hull, its sensory clusters tracking everything she did. They worked in near silence for an hour and 40 minutes. Communication reduced to the minimum, hold, release, turn this, and the occasional flash of color from Ember's skin that the translator didn't bother rendering but that Camel had started reading on her own. The amber thinking pulse when it was processing. The slower, darker blue that meant it was waiting. The quick white flash twice that she didn't have a category for. When she seated the replacement seal and the coupling clicked home, the temperature alarm on her heads-up display shifted from amber to green. She let herself feel that for exactly 1 second. Done, she said. They moved back inside in the same silence. The airlock cycled. Camel pulled her helmet off and leaned against the bulkhead and breathed recycled air that tasted like metal and old sweat and briefly felt like the best thing she'd ever tasted. Then she started laughing. It came out of nowhere. The oxygen-deprived, post-adrenaline, standing in a corridor in a damaged EVA suit next to an alien kind of laughter. The kind that didn't have any real humor in it but wasn't pretending to either. Just the body deciding that this was what it needed right now instead of crying or collapsing, which were the other 2 options. Ember was still. Its sensory clusters tracked her. Its skin went through a rapid sequence she couldn't read. The translator produced, after a moment, query, human vocalization, function. Camel wiped her eyes. It's called laughing. It means, I don't know what it means. It means the thing that was going to kill you didn't, and your body doesn't know what to do with that. Ember considered this efficient. No, Camel said, not even slightly. In the galley, she made coffee dark, bad, the kind that came from a vacuum-sealed brick and tasted like it had given up on itself at some point during shipping. She made 2 cups from habit, turned around, and found Ember standing in the galley doorway watching her. She held out the second cup. The alien took it with 1 limb, turned it, examined it with 2 sensory clusters. Camel lifted her own cup and drank. After a moment, Ember mimicked the motion. Its skin flushed a surprised, brief gold. They stood in the galley of the perihelion in the dark between stars and drank bad coffee, and neither of them said anything, and the ship flew on. The Veth diplomatic vessel arrived 6 hours early, which meant someone had been watching. It came in on an intercept trajectory. No hailing frequency, no standard approach protocol, just there suddenly on Camel's sensor board. A ship 3 times the perihelion size, hull clean and geometric in the way that said money, or whatever the Veth equivalent of money was. Its running lights were a deep violet that meant, according to the diplomatic briefings, official government function. Camel looked at Ember. Ember had gone very still. Its skin, which had been cycling through the warm amber and occasional surprised gold of the past 18 hours, had flattened to something pale and compressed, a color she'd started thinking of as the color of a held breath. It was looking at the sensor display from the corridor, all 4 sensory clusters oriented toward the image of the approaching ship, and not moving. Perihelion, the comm said, in the precise, inflection-managed tones of a translator system significantly more expensive than Ember's. This is Veth Diplomatic Mission Vessel Coherence of Purpose. We are here to recover the individual you have aboard. Please prepare for docking. Camel clicked the comm. Coherence of purpose, this is perihelion. The individual aboard is recovering from a compound fracture sustained approximately 32 hours ago. I'd appreciate if your docking approach kept relative velocity below 2 meters per second. A brief pause. Confirmed. We are aware of the injury. The individual will receive appropriate care immediately upon recovery. Recovery, like Ember, was a piece of equipment that had gone missing. She looked at the corridor again. Ember hadn't moved. Ember, she said. It looked at her. The pale, compressed color in its skin stayed. Camel's translator wasn't good enough for what she wanted to ask. She tried anyway. Do you want to go? Silence. On the comm, she heard the coherence of purpose's docking request ping in, polite and patient, and expecting exactly one answer. The response from the other ship took 30 seconds. When it came, there was a new voice, older, she thought, in whatever way age registered in Veth communication, or maybe just higher ranked. Perihelion. The wants of the individual are not the relevant variable in this situation. Please prepare for docking. Camel put her hand flat on the comm panel and didn't key it. She turned to face Ember fully, in the corridor, the two of them in the specific intimacy of a small ship between stars with something official waiting outside. I'm not going to make you go, she said. I'm not going to stop you either, but I'm not going to tell them you don't have a choice if you do. The translator took a long time. Then, clarification. You are stating that this decision belongs to this individual. Yes. This is not standard human diplomatic protocol. No, Camel agreed, it's not. Another silence. The docking clamps from the coherence of purpose reached for the perihelion's exterior, a sound she felt as much as heard, and outside the port window the clean geometric hull of the diplomatic vessel filled half the sky. Ember's skin cycled through something complex and private, colors Camel didn't have vocabulary for, the full range of whatever it was thinking. She waited. She was good at waiting. It was one of the less glamorous requirements of solo salvage work, and she'd gotten better at it than she'd ever meant to. The diplomatic officials came through the docking collar in a group of 4, immaculate, formal, their translator nodes high-end equipment broadcasting subtle authority. They stopped when they saw Camel standing in the corridor without moving aside. Perihelion Captain, the lead official said, please step aside for the recovery procedure. In a minute, Camel said. She didn't raise her voice. She was wearing a work suit with a patched left forearm, standing in a corridor that smelled like metal and bad coffee, and she held her ground the way someone who had done an EVA on a compromised suit 6 hours ago and fixed a reactor coupling in vacuum next to an injured alien held their ground, which was without drama and without any particular interest in moving. The official's skin did something she couldn't read. This is irregular. Sure, Camel said. Ember, you have time. Ember moved. It came down the corridor, slowly, because of the injured limb, because its healing wasn't complete, because 32 hours and a bad splint and a cup of coffee, and some silence between stars wasn't enough to undo whatever had happened in her cargo hold. But it moved with intention. It stopped in front of the diplomatic officials, and there was a rapid exchange in full-color Veth communication, the kind that Camel couldn't follow and the translator didn't bother trying to render, a private conversation in a language built from light. Then Ember turned back to Camel. It moved to the airlock. It paused. It turned back, all four sensory clusters oriented toward her, its skin shifting through one final sequence, slow and deliberate, a color she had never seen before. Nothing amber, nothing gold, nothing pale. A deep, saturated blue-green that seemed to come from somewhere interior, something the bioluminescence was doing for its own reasons. The translator produced a single word, remember. Then it went through the airlock, into the docking collar, into the official ship that had come for it with its clean violet running lights and its recovery procedure. The diplomatic officials followed, without speaking to her again. The docking collar disengaged. The coherence of purpose pulled away clean, its geometric hull catching the distant starlight, and Camel stood at the port window and watched it go until it was a violet point of light, and then not even that. In the galley, the coffee she'd made 4 hours ago was cold. She poured it anyway, sat down at the small table that was bolted to the deck, because everything had to be bolted to the deck out here, and held the cup in both hands. The perihelion was quiet. The kind of quiet that happens when something is present long enough to leave a shape in the air when it goes. Camel sat in that shape and drank her cold coffee and watched the stars through the porthole. The ones that didn't move because they were far enough away that the ship's motion didn't register, and the ones that moved slowly because they were close enough to measure. She thought about the word the translator had given her. Remember. She thought about the Veth diplomatic report that was probably being drafted somewhere on the coherence of purpose right now, in formal language she'd never read, for officials she'd never meet. She thought about what it would have to say, a human ship, a human captain, a rescue that violated protocol, a question that wasn't supposed to be asked, a silence that somehow became the loudest thing in the negotiation. She thought about the Veth officials standing in her corridor with their expensive translator nodes and their recovery procedure, watching her stand flat-footed in a patchwork suit and refuse to move, and what that had looked like from the outside. She thought about the word remember. In the diplomatic language of species that had been managing first contact protocols for longer than humanity had had writing, remember meant something specific. It wasn't nostalgia. It wasn't sentiment. It was a command and a promise in the same breath, a statement that the thing being named was worth carrying forward into whatever came next as evidence of something true. Camel didn't know most of that. She'd find out later. When the xenocultural briefings eventually reached her, months from now, when the story of the salvaged ship captain and the injured Veth had traveled through diplomatic channels into something official and strange. For now, she just sat in the galley and drank cold coffee and let the quiet be what it was. Then she rinsed the cup, went back to the cockpit and reset her course. The ore delivery was still on schedule if she pushed to 0.4 G. The coolant coupling was new and clean. The EVA suit was still patched, but the patch had held vacuum once and would probably hold it again. The perihelion moved into the dark between stars, small and battered and entirely itself, carrying its cargo and its memories and its one woman who had asked a question that wasn't in any protocol because it was the only question that made sense. The stars didn't move. The coffee was gone. The ship kept flying,